What is both the second most traded commodity in the world and my favorite drink in the world? That's right, we're talking coffee. Welcome back to Let's Talk Poli, everybody. This is Season 1, Episode 2, and I've got Jerome on the pod. Jerome was a barista at Humble Line, and since then he's moved on to start his own roastery with a couple of business partners, and luckily he's one of those who actually sources his coffee directly from the farmers. I figured what better person to come on board and talk to me about coffee and how politics could affect it, or how coffee could affect politics in the other way as well. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into that interview. Jerome is going to introduce himself, tell us a bit about his background, and then give us a little lesson on how coffee is grown. We'll also touch upon a few conflict-ridden countries also happen to be coffee-producing countries. I hope you guys enjoy the interview. Please stay tuned until the very end to find out what you can expect next week. And without further ado, Jerome Grenier-Desbiens. Hello, Jerome. So tell me about yourself and what got you into coffee.
Basically, I was looking for a job, and I was off from a venture project with my family, figured out that doing business with my family was not right for me, and I applied in a coffee shop I was already buying beans from, called S01E02 in the St. Henry neighborhood of Montreal. And I'd say I sort of got hooked. I've got a background in chemistry, sociology, and politics. And basically, in layman's word, I'm a bit of a university drop-off. But all of those three backgrounds sort of crystallized when I started working in coffee.
Yeah, so we met when you were working at Humble Line, where I ended up spending most of my days there studying and drinking far too much coffee for anybody's good. Well, I mean, I came out all right.
You maxed out the productivity.
Yeah.
So that's not too bad. Squeeze every ounce of it.
Yeah, I made sure that you guys had always something to do.
Yep.
So I'm just going to skip right into it. And where is coffee grown, and basically what countries does it come from?
Basically, coffee is grown around the equator. So often we're going to talk about the coffee belt, which is southern Mexico all the way down to Brazil. And then in Africa, you're going to get it in Sudan, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, a bit of Arabia and Yemen, India, and then Java, Sulawesi, in the Philippines and Oceania. And obviously the islands scattered in the Pacific with Hawaii, for instance, that will grow coffee.
Yeah, and so you currently run a roaster,
Yep.
and you basically serve single origin coffee.
I serve single origin coffee and blends.
Okay.
But in every case, we get the traceability all the way down to either the plot of land within a farm or the farm itself.
Okay. And which country do you get your coffee from?
Currently, we got coffees from Brazil and Colombia, and we've got more coming from Kenya and Ethiopia as well.
Okay. And so when we say you get coffee, what form does it come in, and who are the people who actually grow it?
Well, people that grow coffee are coffee farmers, and it comes under the form, at my level, which is fairly small-scale roaster, it's green coffee in jute bags, either 60 kilo or 69 kilo, depending on which farm it's coming from and which country it's coming from. So once we get the green coffee, we roast it, comes out brown, and then you're able to grind it and brew it.
Cool. And so for those who don't know, what form does coffee grow in? Can just basically
It's a small tree. Depending on the variety of the tree itself, you will have coffee trees that will be 3, 4, 5 foot high, and then you can get varieties like Typica that will grow up to 15 feet high. So it's a small tree. It has the look of a lilac tree, and it grows cherries along its branches at little nods. So when the cherry turns red, you harvest it. In each cherry, you will have 2 seeds that are the green coffee. So basically, the farmer will grow the farm, work the land, harvest the cherries, and then he's gonna at that point there's a bunch of different processes, but the classic one would be a wash process, which he will remove the fruit, wash the green bean that is at this point is full of humidity, and then dry it.
Sun-dry.
Down to about 11%.
Okay.
And at this point, it's stable for export.
All right. When you say stable, you mean it's less likely to rot or...
Exactly. Less likely to rot, less likely to germ as well.
Okay.
But you can still grab a bean of green coffee and you will get a tree out of it.
Okay. So at this stage, we can still grow more coffee from that bean. Okay. And so I heard that a lot of farms basically operate as sort of communities or group themselves into communities.
At the ground level, the reality is that you have a lot of small-scale producers. For instance, in Colombia, a lot of the people will, on average, own 3 hectares. You will have some bigger farmers, but on a per capita basis, there's a much more predominance of small-scale farmers. That's regional to Colombia. In Brazil, it's a different environment, and the coffee grows on high plateaus. So through time, you got people that bought their neighbors, and then the farms are much bigger in Brazil. And given the topography, you get more mechanization as well. For Ethiopia, you have a different setup. Ethiopia, basically, Arabica coffee is native from Ethiopia, and it grows wild. So when I buy my coffee from Colombia, I know the farm, I know the farm owner, I've shaken hand with him, or I know the small co-op, the small community that he's a member of, and I know what genetic variety like the coffee tree is. When you go in Ethiopia, it's a very different setup because every farmer, we basically buy a piece of land, and then you have some fields that you have cattle, sheep, you have your garden where you grow your vegetables. At the back of your farm, you've got the forest, and that's where the coffee tree grows.
Wild.
Not
organized, not
native.
Okay.
So,
are there benefits to that, or is it does it give a different flavor profile?
It's just there are different flavor profile, but it's a bit like here in Canada with maple trees. You buy the plot of land, there's forest, there's going to be maple tree.
I see. Okay.
So that's basically how they're going to work in Ethiopia, and then they will bring their coffee down to a centralized wet mill at the village.
Okay.
So
what is a wet mill?
Wet mill is where you do the transformation of fruit to seed.
Okay.
And basically, when you buy, if I buy from Colombia, I'm going to buy from a farmer or a co-op. If I buy from Brazil, I'm going to buy from an estate. Same with Kenya. If I buy from Ethiopia, I'm going to buy from a wet mill that is often just a village or from a city. Okay. So that's why you see, for instance, Yergechefe coffees, or that's from the town of Yergechefe in the department of Sidama. And then if you buy Gelena Abaya, that's the name of the wet mill, which is also the name of the village.
Okay, I see. And right now we're at Yo & Co.
Yep.
And the coffee that I'm drinking right now, do you know if this is...
I believe this is the Dancing Gold Dark from Demelo Paleta, and it's a Brazilian from Poco de Caldas.
Okay, and you said that you buy coffee from Brazilian roasters. So what is the kind of variety that we're looking at, say, in a country like Brazil? So
Brazil
this coffee
historically has a lot of bourbon.
Okay.
For high end, that's what you're going to find predominantly. And then for the lower quality, you're going to have some hybrids, Catimor mainly, which are hybrid between Arabica and Robusta.
And in, for example, large chains like Starbucks and whatnot, what kind of coffee do they use, and do they buy it directly from the farmers, or is it co-ops or something
They buy either from the co-op or from estates or from exporters.
I see.
So in Colombia, the National Federation, the FNC, has an export arm, a division that does only exportation.
This is a governmental body.
It's government body, but it's a federation of all the farmers.
Okay.
So the farmers do have an influence, but it's a highly politicized entity for sure.
And so you went to Colombia to
Yep.
actually source your coffee, and we were just talking about how you were there around the negotiations with the FARC
Yep.
the FARC rebels. For those who don't know, could you elaborate a bit on what FARC is and what was happening?
Basically, Colombia is a country that half of it is the Amazonas, the jungle that goes into Venezuela and Brazil. And then the other half of it is 3 mountain ranges that go down all the way to Patagonia. Bogota is in one of the main valleys between the eastern and central mountain range. But all of the jungle part is really remote, and you have some pockets of really remote country as well. And then what happened politically in Colombia is that I believe 50 years ago you had Marxist rebels that started fighting the government and wanted to create a Marxist country, a Marxist political system. So they ended up having basically half of the country at their height, with a lot of fighting. Basically, anybody you walk into in Colombia, you're going to have someone that has family that died or disappeared during those years.
And those were during which years again?
Up until 2016.
Okay. And so what happened in 2016?
Basically, in 2016, the government came to an agreement with the FARC for disarmament and also amnesty for the FARC leaders, which was basically taking the rebels, removing their guns from their hands, and then bringing them into the civil society.
Okay, and as part of that deal, the government granted FARC leaders some sort of influence within the legislative.
Yes. Basically, it's a bit like Sinn Féin in Ireland, where Sinn Féin was a terrorist group, but also through a different way than it happened with Colombia. You had this terrorist group or rebel group that became a legitimized political entity.
Yeah.
But it's not all done in Colombia. When I was there, I left about 4 or 5 days before the public referendum came out. And basically a bunch of the population found the deal too soft for the FARC because people suffered so much that they wanted to have a bit more punishment. And then through the years, the FARC sort of exploded a bit. You had some subdivisions, and you also had the government was so inefficient at fighting the rebels that you have paramilitary groups that sprouted in the town of San Martin initially, and those ended up also needed to fund themselves. So you've got some FARC groups that are still active, still funded by cocaine. You got paramilitaries that are fighting both the FARCs and the central government, funding out of cocaine as well. And then you have some paramilitary groups that are pacific, but they don't want to demobilize yet.
Correct. Because so currently, is there still fear that the FARC rebels might?
Absolutely. In over 50 years, it almost becomes a way of life that you need a local militia.
I see.
In some regions. And you still get a lot of kidnappings as well.
So we've covered basically how the locals actually perceive this entire movement of the FARC rebels. What has been the international response, if any at all?
It's a lot of relief because first, well, civil war is ending on paper, and it also from a trading perspective, you had a lot of the markets got much more confident, albeit you had a bit of a parallel system for coffee out of Colombia. But in general, everybody was super happy.
Okay.
People were partying in the streets.
Understandably so. But in terms of, so you mentioned that there was a parallel system for coffee. Does that mean that over the past 50 years, and now with the sort of peaceful, relatively peaceful resolution to the situation, has it affected coffee trade in any way, or simply it's continued as it was for the past 50 years?
What I'm seeing myself is more delicious coffee from more regions of Colombia. Basically, the regions that were controlled by the FARCs, what would happen is that the farmer would grow his coffee, and let's say he produces 10 bags, walks down the mountain with his 10 bags of coffee at the end of harvest, brings it to the mill or to the co-op in the village, and right before that, there's the FARC, stop him, and then they just racket a bag of coffee out of him as sort of tax or payment. And then the farmer sells his 9 bags, because one of the interesting thing is that you have the representatives from the FNC, from the National Federation, they call them the camisetas amarillas, so the yellow shirts, because every agronomist or representative or member will have those bright sun yellow polo shirts from the FNC, and the sort of the rule was you don't kidnap those guys, you don't harm them, you let them do their jobs, and that helped sort of normalize and create channels for negotiation as well through those officials from the federation.
Okay. And was that rule instituted by the actual FARCs, or was that a sort of the FARCs respecting the law to some extent?
I don't believe it was necessarily the FARCs respecting the law, but coffee is so important in Colombia and in the world in general. It's the second most traded commodity right after oil and right before natural gas, that I would be tempted to say that the FARC didn't really have a choice. If you take out the main income from everybody, how do you get people to like you and want to be part of your rebellion?
So truly just a political move.
I would guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you already brought up what I was going to ask, and the fact that coffee is one of the most traded commodities in the world. In the U.S., it's estimated that the economic output that coffee adds to the American GDP is well over 200 billion.
Yeah.
How much of that money actually goes to farmers who actually grow the coffee?
Really not a lot. For commodity coffee, basically the lowest market, like the lower market, you have less than 1% that will go back to the farmer directly, and the most of the money is made at the roaster, retailer, and importer levels. So up north, basically.
So let's take a $4 cup of coffee. Are we talking about less than 4 cents going to?
For a $4 coffee, you're probably already in the specialty or fair trade level. I'm talking about like $1 a cup of coffee.
I see.
At $1 cup of coffee, you have less than a cent that goes back to a farmer.
And when we're talking about, so what is, well, since we're on the topic,
Yeah.
What is the difference between fair trade coffee and commodity coffee? Is that it?
Yeah, commodity coffee is basically the baseline for export. You have lower than commodity level as well, but those you see more often at the producing countries.
What do you mean by that?
Basically, they export the good stuff.
Okay. And they keep whatever is below commodity
for
level?
internal consumption.
Okay.
Yeah. You see the same thing here in Canada, in Quebec, with pork.
I see.
We make amazing pork. We don't eat it. We export it to Japan. So
I did not know that.
Yeah. So we do the same thing with maple syrup as well.
Okay. And so what is fair trade coffee as opposed to commodity
Fair
coffee?
trade coffee is basically baseline for price and conditions.
Okay.
So when a coffee is certified fair trade, you pay a premium over the market price,
Okay.
and you get a coffee that is certified fair trade all the way down to the co-op, so the group of growers, the group of farmers, and that says that the farmer was paid basically livable wage, and that you had a ton of other factors such as no child labor. You get women representations as well in the organizations. A ton of other factors like that are a factor in the fair trade certification.
And in terms of that social aspect of fair trade, who sort of regulates it? Who makes sure that that's actually checked?
You have Fair Trade International, and then you have Fair Trade USA. So you can get your coffee certified by two different bodies that are called Fair Trade. Basically, Fair Trade USA split, I believe, in the early 2000s from the international coalition.
Okay.
But all in all, what fair trade does is a bit like the minimum wage and labor norms here in the province of Quebec, which it guarantees you that you're buying a coffee that was over the production price for the farmer, and it guarantees you that the farmer is not being abused. But
okay. And is this a check, for example, abuse by the farmer of his employees, or is it usually one farmer, one employee?
A lot of
farm?
that depends. Larger farms will have employees, and then small farmers, for instance, like a farmer that has 1 hectare, 1.5 hectares, will hire labor for harvest when there's a lot of man hours to be put in the land, and then the rest of the time he's going to be by himself with his family and his kids.
Okay. And for example, during the harvest, is it checked that like those people are paid livable wages and are treated well?
Fair trade would do that.
Okay.
Yes.
That being said, generally farmers don't necessarily live that much of a glorious life considering the amount of money that floats around.
It's definitely a rugged lifestyle.
And so you were there. What did you see? What was a day in the life of a farmer? How did they live? And in the end of the day, were they happy the way they lived?
It reminds me basically how my father grew up on a farm, a milk farm, and it reminded how they were basically presenting their daily life. Reminded me a lot of how my father would talk about it, which was basically wake up super early in the morning, go work the land, come back, have breakfast, go back work on the farm, all the way until late night. So, but you're seeing a lot of transformations as well. Now you see a lot of the younger generation going to the city for school, and then they're not necessarily coming back.
So we know that urbanization is a major factor in globalization.
Yep.
Are we seeing that potentially coffee farms might be lacking manpower, or
it's already a crisis in some parts of Central America and South America?
And how does it affect, for example, us, the usual sort of consumer of third wave coffee, for example?
The straightforward answer is that your coffee will be more expensive because you gotta pay higher to get the labor to your farm.
Okay.
So the cost of production increases.
And obviously, all all the players in between farmer and consumer don't necessarily want to absorb that increasing cost.
They don't necessarily want to absorb, but at the same time, interesting thing is that when you get traceability, you often end up seeing people lower their margins.
And what do you mean by traceability?
For instance, when I buy my coffee from the farmers I deal with in Colombia, I deal directly with them. So I'm going to have full traceability. I'm going to know from them how much money they're making. I'm going to know if they're being paid by the exporter.
I see.
I'm going to know if the price that we agreed on was the price that they were paid.
So basically that sort of insurance policy that you know they've been paid properly,
absolutely,
it warrants you the sort of comfort of and willingness to absorb some of the cost.
Back in the mid 2000s, you had coffee roasters, for instance, Stumptown and Telly, or Counterculture, that they were just starting the direct trade movement themselves. And there's plenty of stories that they would agree to have the coffee from a co-op, and then when they visit the co-op the next year, and they just do sort of a post-mortem of the year before, and they learn that the premium that they agreed to pay was never transferred to the farmers.
And where does that get lost? Is at what level?
It's along the way. At that point, you gotta find who lined his socks with the money.
And so so let's go from the sort of buying it from the co-op up to the actual roaster. Who are the players in between?
The way I deal is I have the farmer, and then he's gonna process his coffee, bring it to one of the exporters' dry mill, which basically is a place for packaging the coffee. The exporter that I deal with will then bring the coffee to port, that is put into a container, shipped to Toronto by my importer, who then brings it freight truck basically to my own warehouse.
So there are quite a few players there.
There are quite a few players. There's the farmer, the exporter, the importer, myself, and then further down the road there's going to be the retailer, the coffee shop, and then the consumer. But that's only 5 guys. And it's one of the most traceable way of handling things.
Okay.
Whereas it can get really complicated where you can buy coffee, general quality from a region that you don't necessarily know all the way to the farm or even who grew it.
Yeah.
We can buy just plain regular Colombian coffee.
Okay.
You don't know when it was harvested. You don't know where it's from.
That's some would say dodgy practice in general.
It's not necessarily dodgy, because you can still get coffees that, for instance, will be fair trade certified at that level. Mm-hmm. So you get an ID, and then you know that this specific lot was blended from these other lots. So you still get traceability through certifications. But before direct trade and fair trade were happening, you had the farmer that would sell to a guy in the village. He would then upsell it to another guy, who would then upsell it to the exporter, who would then upsell it to an importer, who would then upsell it again, and you had they would call them coyotes, basically.
Lovely. And so when did the sort of practice of farmers selling directly to roasters such as yourself start?
It started with all the wave of the progressive coffee shops, mainly on the west coast of the U.S. So like we said earlier, Stumptown, Pete's, Intelligentsia. You had also George Howell that went in early as well, Counterculture, and Blue Bottle.
And was that out of sort of purely ethical corporate responsibility thought process, or was that also a very much economical thought process?
Part of it was ethical, part of it was market differentiation by quality. So you need to go down to the source to be able to source great coffee. Otherwise, what happens with great coffee is that it gets blended with regular, and then it's just the quality becomes a big average. So you do need to have the direct links with the guys that make the coffee in order to have quality coffee. That's something you can't go around.
Okay.
You have either to go to origin or to deal with people that go to origin.
And there's also this practice of being a grader. Is that?
Yeah, Q grader.
Q grader.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit about that, and how does that influence sort of
Q
the coffee
grader
trade?
is a bit like a in wine they call them œnologue, which is basically a certification about wine quality and how you can assess the quality of the grapes and the quality of building up the wine. So a Q grader will do a very similar thing. And at the end of the day, what a Q grader does is that he grades green coffee on a scale up to 100 points. 80 points and above is specialty.
Okay.
And then lower than that, you'll have commodity coffee.
And are Q graders just used to sort of figure out how to market a certain type of coffee, or is there a sort of a fair trade aspect to it, sort of supervising the fair trade?
There's no fair trade aspect to it. Fair trade has no quality attached to it. So you're going to have 84, 85 point fair trade coffee, which is very good specialty coffee. And then you're going to have 65, 70 point fair trade coffee as well.
So Q graders are purely sort of a quality check.
Absolutely.
Okay. And that allows you to determine the price at which you would be selling
Exactly.
said coffee.
So higher quality coffee will fetch a higher price.
Okay.
And how you can assess the quality is to pass it through someone that has this Q grader license that will assess the coffee and say, all right, this is the points that this coffee is on the scale.
And you already touched upon how in Colombia the FARC did not touch the coffee farmers very aggressively, though they might tax.
Well, they're gonna tax it. They're gonna kidnap his uncle and ask for money for ransom. So it was not all fun and games at all. Far from that.
So that's a good lead up to my question: is how does coffee in any way sort of affect political movements? Because a lot of the countries where coffee is grown in the sort of coffee belt we're talking about, countries such as Colombia, as we've discussed. Yemen is in the coffee belt, Angola, Sudan, Zimbabwe, all countries that, let's be perfectly honest, aren't the most stable, especially Yemen.
Yep.
For those listening, I wrote an article about it on Let's Talk Poli, so feel free to have a read about that one. But how does coffee sort of affect politics, or how does politics affect coffee?
Well, politics affect coffee in terms it's going to affect supply and demand, just like weather does. If tomorrow morning we would learn that, in fact, the FARC are remobilizing and getting back to fighting, the market would react, just like the market reacts when we learn that flowering in the coffee trees is late in Brazil, so the supply is going to be low in 8 months. So you do see a lot of swings in the market. That affects more of the bigger coffee players, but at that point they're already playing around hedging their risk, and the market swings a lot as well because there's some speculation happening as well on the coffee market.
And how do roasters hedge their bets? How do coffee traders hedge their bets when it's a matter of, is the weather going to be good? Is some political movement gonna
It's
rise up?
buying futures. So basically it's like buying your airplane ticket. So you want to go fly to Paris. You go 6 months ahead of time of your flight time, and then you look at how the market's behaving, and then when the ticket is under $600, you buy it. So, and then you've paid $600, even if the ticket at the time of departure goes up to $1,000, you don't care. So the bigger guys, they will buy futures. They will also simply have a range of where they can buy their coffee. So if it's under $1.50, under $1.45, that's how they're going to move.
And when you say $1.50, $1.45, what kind of amounts are we talking about?
That's basically US dollars per pound.
Okay.
That's the baseline, the base unit for trading. But the larger guys are going to go by the container load. So it's like deals of hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time.
And when you say bigger guys, who are the bigger guys in the industry at the minute?
Kraft Food, Mother Parkers, Starbucks is quite big as well. Those kind of guys. But like Kraft Food will roast, if I recall, 40 to 45 containers a day.
That's a lot.
It's a lot of coffee. I'm gonna myself on my first year of my startup, I'm gonna roast probably 20 bags of coffee. A container houses 300.
Yeah, that's a good scale right there.
Yep. So I'm a molecule in the tank that is the 200 billion worth of coffee in the world myself.
Yeah. I had a question in mind, trying to remember it.
We could talk about Yemen.
Let's talk about Yemen. Is any coffee coming out of Yemen at the minute?
Not a lot. There's an interesting project on the specialty scale that is called Port of Mocha, which is a high-end Yemeni coffee. Yemen is quite interesting historically because we call the plant Coffea arabica because the Arabs uprooted it, took it out of Ethiopia, or would just grab the seeds, the green coffee from Ethiopia, bring it to Yemen, where you had the port of Mocha. And still to this day, there are roasters that will sell Mocha Java blend, which was a blend from coffee that was dealt through the port of Mocha, and then from the island of Java. That would make the blend.
What is the port of Mocha? Where is the port of Mocha?
It's a city in Yemen.
Okay.
And on the Arabic Peninsula. So you have some amazing coffees that grow in Yemen, but we haven't seen them on the market for years.
Because of the current crisis in Yemen?
Because of the current crisis, exactly, in Yemen.
So when was the last time that Yemeni coffee was on the market?
Well, they're still on the market, but they're not necessarily marketed in such a way, and they're really harder to buy because there's a lot less.
Okay.
And then some of it is smuggled out of the country and sold and used to finance the rebellions. So there's still coffee being harvested in Yemen, but the farmers at the farmer level, they have a much harder time, or they just can't farm the land anymore. So the supply has dropped. And we're talking like, for instance, 10, 15 years ago, when I did my curator license 4 years ago, there's a bunch of tasting tests where they test you if you can smell or taste things, and then there's one exam that is written. It's 100 questions, and I failed the question that was asking if Yemen was a producing country, because I've been working and drinking specialty coffee for the last 8-10 years, and I never came across a coffee from Yemen.
And I think just for context for everybody listening, Yemen is currently in a crisis where basically 22 of the 26 million people are estimated to actually need some sort of humanitarian aid, and are basically the the location of a proxy war between several of its neighboring countries. And again, you could read more about that on the website. But so we know that Yemeni coffee hasn't been very aggressively marketed or marketed at all. There was recently, and by recently I mean a few years ago, I remember when you were working at Humble Line, we were talking about how Rwandan coffee was coming back on the map. What's the situation now, a few years down the line?
There's some amazing coffees coming out of Rwanda, and through the direct trade model, you get also some good, very good traceability with the coffees from Rwanda. So things are getting a bit more stable. That being said, I'm not so much aware of how things are politically in Rwanda currently, but I know that there's going to be more and more, that's what I'm being told, there's going to be more and more very good coffees from Rwanda, and also the trading routes are more stable as well.
And so, for example, for coffee from Rwanda, what does the trading route say to anywhere in North America, for example?
Basically, the coffee is harvested in Rwanda, and then either going to cross Lake Kivu to Tanzania or Kenya, or going to go by truck through Kenya, because Rwanda has no access to ocean.
Water,
And then, so when you buy a coffee from Rwanda, you buy it free on truck instead of free on board. Then you get it shipped by a boat all the way to, often it's going to be through Continental terminals in New Jersey. And then from truck all the way to you.
So it's not such a, like, I think that, so the most difficult part in that is basically getting that truck from Rwanda over to Kenya,
yes,
which I assume Mombasa?
Yeah. The trickiest part would be finding people that can do that for you, that are reliable and that you can trust. Exactly. So it's like any trade, it's a question of relationships. You build relationships, and then you build contacts, and it's something done over time, and that I personally find very gratifying as well. So it's always a question of finding the right people to deal with, in my mind.
Yeah, that's always, relationships are at the end of the day the key to any sort of business success. And I just want to touch on, what are some other countries from the coffee belt that actually produce coffee but aren't marketed as such or aren't marketing as much, just like Yemen?
The biggest one that we can talk about is Vietnam. Vietnam is the second largest producer of coffee after Brazil.
But yet we don't hear that much about Vietnamese coffee.
We don't hear at all about...
Is it because it goes to the local market, or is it because it goes to Southeast Asia only?
It's because they grow Robusta.
And what is Robusta?
So, Robusta is the dinky, ugly cousin of Arabica.
And why is it
dinky, or it's sort of the if I'm correct, actually, it's the father of Arabica, and it's basically the lower grade coffee. It's got flavors often of rubber, petroleum. It's pungent, but it has a lot of body, and at the end of the day, it still tastes like coffee if you roast it dark enough. So Robusta is used predominantly for instant coffee.
And when you say instant coffee, do you mean by the likes of Kraft and whatnot?
Yeah, Nescafe, the thing, you grab a spoonful, put it in hot water, it dissolves.
Yeah, very much know what that is.
Yeah, so that's what a lot of people will drink in Africa, in Asia, India as well.
So Robusta is predominantly used and consumed in sort of very lowbrow coffee.
Yeah, it's definitely on the lower quality end of the scale. That being said, there's a push currently to make higher quality Robusta. because there are varieties and there are ways of farming Robusta that are that end with a cup that tastes better. We're not there yet in terms of getting it to the same level as tasty as a cup of Colombian Arabica coffee, but there's a lot of work being done in that way, mainly out of Central Africa, so Congo, Uganda, basically where Robusta is native.
And when I think of sort of Asian coffee, I often think of coffee with either condensed milk or a crap ton of milk with a lot of sugar. Is that the reason that is there some sort of reasoning that that's why condensed milk and basically adding a lot of flavor to it is
from a flavor profile point of view, I'd be tempted to say yes, because when you have coffee that is lower quality, it doesn't have a sweet character, it doesn't have a lot of acidity, often the body will be lacking as well. So here in Canada you do a double with it. You add cream and sugar, so that brings up the body, revives the flavor of it, and then you add the sweetener to reduce the bitterness. So condensed milk over Robusta coffee, it doesn't taste so bad.
It's true. I know that I've tasted it and it doesn't taste that bad.
Yeah.
So are you telling me that Tim Hortons uses Robusta coffee?
No, they use Catimor.
And where is Catimor?
A lot of what they have is Tim Hortons don't exclusively source that specific hybrid of Arabica and Robusta, but some of the beans that you will drink are Catimor, and it's a hybrid that is grown a lot in Brazil, because at the end of the day what Robusta does is that it has better pest resistance against fungus, against disease, and it's a bit more of a burly, stout tree that's easier to harvest as well. So it produces more cherries per tree than Arabica. So the industrial way of growing coffee says grow Robusta.
Okay. But Starbucks, for example, uses Arabica as well.
Starbucks use predominantly Arabica.
Okay.
Yeah, predominantly Arabica. And Starbucks often will have the lower quality range in the specialty range, so they will be at 81, 82 points. But another thing to factor in with those big players is that they're stuck a bit, they've painted themselves in the corner.
In what way?
Because of the size of their orders.
Not many people can fulfill those types of orders, you mean?
And not any type of quality can fulfill these types of orders, because when you're dealing with very high-end coffee, 85, 86, 87, 88 points or above, you're talking about microlots, which is 50 bags. I've got a microlot that we bought. It's one farmer and his son. They produced 3 bags of it. 140 kilos. That's it.
And just for sort of like illustration's sake, we all know it's a sort of, the little, I think 16-ounce bag. No, how much?
Well, to give you an idea, which is, I was discussing with the green buyer of Timothy's, which is a fairly large chain in central and western Canada, and they supply hotels and supply a lot of people. And then I was asking him about microlots, and I was telling him like, how does that influences you buying 10, 15 bags at a time when your volume is that you got to move on container loads? And he said, I have no interest in going for those coffees. What would I do with it? Roast it and then send one 200-gram bag to each of my outlets? Doesn't make really a lot of sense. But you see a bunch of reorganization, especially Starbucks with the Reserve sub-brand, that they're bringing in more of the microlots, the larger size of the microlots, and more traceability as well. So instead of having just a straight Ethiopian, you're going to have an Ethiopian from Kaffa, which is a region of Ethiopia. So you're getting down to the regional level. So on my end, I'm really interested to see how that's going to influence the supply chain, because you're getting more traceability, you're getting people from the consumer side as well as the farming side much more aware that quality is a driver for livelihood of the farmers and for sustainability of the supply chain as well.
So would you say basically the whole, like the quality and the sort of corporate social responsibility is improving at all levels of the supply chain, or
a lot? Yeah.
And what kind of, aside from Starbucks doing the reserve and adding a lot more traceability to it, are there any other movements to sort of improve that aspect of coffee production?
Well, I can give you another example. I import part of my coffees with RGC coffee, which is based out of Westmount, here in the island of Montreal, and they do relationship coffees. And if I'm not mistaken, they just financed a centralized wet mill for a co-op of farmers, and the cost of the equipment is $50,000 US. But that's financed by the importer because they've been working years and years with those farmers, and they built this relationship. And at the end of the day, building those relationships ensures your supply as well.
That's true.
So for these importers, it's more interesting to build on those relationships because there's going to be, specialty coffee is growing. There's going to be more and more people interested to buy it.
So at the end of the day, it's just like we said earlier, it's all about building those relationships with your partners.
Yeah.
So to touch on a more fun subject, what are some of the if you had the choice to pick whatever coffee you wanted in the world, what would be the coffee that you'd like to pursue to roast on a sort of retail scale to be able to actually sell it rather than just do a micro batch for yourself?
Well, summer's coming, so I'm really looking forward to have a good cup of Ethiopian, something floral and sweet and fruity. But at the same time, there's amazing coffees coming out of a lot of countries. So it's the tricky question that you're asking.
Exactly. That's the point.
It's like, it's a bit like wine. There's amazing wines out of California. There's amazing wine out of France. So it's always tricky.
As we're approaching towards the end of our little interview here, can you tell us what is going to be happening with Structure Roasters, which is your roastery, and also a little bit about what you'll be doing personally in the coming 6 months to a year?
6 months to a year, basically for Structure. Expect to see a web store within a month, so that you'll be able to buy our coffee from the comfort of your cell phone.
Go ahead and plug the URL.
Yeah, structurecoffeeroasters.com.
There you go.
And that's it. Also, October, expect the East Coast Coffee Madness to make a return, which is a coffee event that I organize.
And that's the largest coffee event in Eastern Canada?
Yeah.
And what to expect there? What should people be coming for?
Basically, the concept is speakers of international caliber and attendees of anybody from the big coffee fan, the prosumer, all the way to farmers, importer, exporter, roasters, to professionals, basically.
Cool.
So,
and finally, whenever I have a single guest on the podcast, I like to ask 5 fun facts or stories about yourself.
All right, I'll try to make the count. I really like tea.
That's one.
As a coffee guy.
What about wine?
I love wine as well. Well, here's another fun fact. I just sold 2 home brewers to a customer who's a wine importer. So I brokered it for 2 good bottles of wine.
That's always a good deal.
Yeah. Sold my home batch brewer in Chemex.
What wine was that?
I don't know yet.
That is trusting your business relationships right there.
It's relationships. Yeah.
So that's 2.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm I'm a barista competitor that dropped his drink on the stage at the national level.
Ouch.
Yes. Two of the judges are 2 of my good friends, and they keep on telling me how it was funny to just hear "oopsie." So, yeah.
And I think this is that 4? Is that 4?
Yeah. Third one. That was the third one.
Yeah.
We could say it was the 5th one, but I can still keep on
No,
looking.
keep on going. Should we talk about your passion for fishing?
Yeah, I still got my passion for fly fishing. Picked up running as well, trying to get rid of my 2 sympathy pregnancies from my 2 kids.
2 sympathy? What?
Yeah, pregnancy. A sympathy pregnancy is when the husband gains weight during the pregnancy.
Ah, I see. Okay.
So that's basically the idea.
So is that 4 and 5?
We could call it 4 and 5.
I will end your misery here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerome.
You
for
had
coming
me
on the
scrapping
podcast.
for answers.
Thank you very much, and I wish you the best of luck with structure and ECCM.
Yeah, thank you. Wish you the best for the ventures and the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you very much, Jerome. Coffee is something I love a lot, and I love spending time in coffee shops, but I think I've realized that recording in a coffee shop might have not been the best idea, even though it set the mood for the conversation. If you feel like letting me know that wasn't such a good idea, please feel free to do so. You could always just, leave your feedback in the reviews. Maybe not on this one, but always feel free to drop me an email at nikita@letstalkpoly.com. I'd highly suggest, going and getting yourself a bag of Structure coffee. Jerome gave me a bag after we had this little conversation, and I look forward to actually trying it out. But as promised, before the interview started, I will let you know what is going to be happening next week. Last week, actually, we recorded an hour and 20 minutes of conversation on the opioid crisis in America. It is a hell of a situation currently in the States. And there's a lot to say about it. There's a lot to discuss. I wanted to put that out this week, but it would have been a hell of an editing job because it is an hour and 20 minutes of content. I'll be working on that this week, hopefully putting out part 1 and part 2 the following week. And I hope to be bringing along some more content for you guys in the coming weeks. Again, I would highly appreciate a little review on the pod, whether that be on iTunes, Breaker, Stitcher, wherever it is that you're listening to the pod. I appreciate your time, and we're gonna go with our catchphrase. Have a great week, everybody, and get your friends and tell them, let's talk poly.